Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, probably a few people. I'm going to just wait for a minute to see more attendees join in and then get the webinar going. I can already see the attendee count going up. Hi, welcome to Be Waste Wise. I am Shweta Dandapani. I am one of the community builders at Be Waste Wise. Be Waste Wise organizes 2 webinars every month on a wide range of topics around waste management, sustainability, circulate economy at large. Today, we have a webinar that we have organized in collaboration with the Circulate Initiative. This is based on a study that they had done last year, more of which they will talk about in very shortly. So we have Umesh Madhavan, Research Director of the Circulate Initiative, who will moderate this webinar. He will also present the findings of the study. We will drop a link to the study in chat. Along with Umesh, we have Julene Liu, who's a research analyst at the Circulate Initiative. Julene will try to answer some of your questions during the course of the webinar. Umesh is going to discuss and talk to 3 panelists. We have Tien An, who is a plastic waste management specialist from GrabTech in Vietnam. We have Lubna Ananthakrishnan, who works with waste pickers in India. She's associated with the Waste Pickers Cooperative Swatch and also the trade union KKPKP. And we have Mani Vajpayee, who's a co-founder and CEO of Banyan Nation that is based in India. If you have any questions, just some admin housekeeping right now. If you have any questions, please send them to Q&A. Please use chat to introduce yourselves or converse amongst yourselves, or if you have any other comments. So over to you, Umesh.
Thank you for the introduction, Shweta. Julene, may I request you to pull up the slides, please? Thanks so much for the collaboration, Be Waste Wise, and it's a pleasure to be here. As Shweta mentioned, this webinar follows up on a study which we actually published last year, around the same time last year, in fact. And this was on pricing transparency in the recycled plastic supply chain. We did the study for 4 markets, India, Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam. We will not be sharing all the findings from that study here because that would take a few hours. So we will keep it very focused on a couple of slides just to introduce the context and what we learned from that study, just one example. But as Lubna shared, and probably my colleague Julene will do, we'll share the link to the report should you wish to download the report and read through some of the findings. There's also a tool that we have developed for modeling sake, which you can refer to as well, and feel free to play around with the tool just to get a better grip of what the research was about, what's the impact of policies, various policies on pricing transparency. So when we embarked on the study, the objective was to understand how pricing transparency can unlock demand for recycled plastics. So the whole purpose was that if you can understand how pricing influences the demand for recycled plastics, we can support stakeholders across the value chain, especially with a focus on collectors, aggregators, and recyclers. It was also driven by the fact that increasing the clarity on current and future feedstock availability, costs, pricing of different recycled polymers will help all the stakeholders. I mean, it's not just for one stakeholder. All stakeholders are better understand the addressable market opportunity, what's the flow looking like for various polymers, various types of polymers, and then start making investment decisions based on that better knowledge. So to familiarize everyone with the study and to provide context for our discussion today, let me bring up a couple of slides. And then following on from that brief presentation, which I do, I'll call on my panelists to answer a few questions, following which we'll have questions from the audience as well. Next slide, please. So when we embarked on the study, how did we define pricing transparency and what does it mean? So partially reading off the screen that you see at the moment, pricing transparency refers to the degree to which information on the prices of plastic waste and of the finished products in each part of the value chain is available to all buyers and sellers in each market. So pricing transparency is important both vertically, where actors have a good view of prices upstream and downstream their supply chains, as well as horizontally, where you have actors working as collectors, aggregators, and so on, and producing the same output so that they have visibility on comparable pricing for their products. So why is pricing transparency important? It is important because it ensures that all actors, all the way in the case of the recycled plastic supply chain in particular, especially the informal waste workers and their associations who collect plastic waste, to recyclers who are one step before the brands buy the product are fairly compensated for their services. So that democratization of information on pricing would help improve the visibility and also help improve the output of products. It also helps support investment because obviously the risk element is sort of reduced when you know what the feedstock flows are like. It provides greater clarity to investors to assess project and market risks, therefore assuring greater assurance on the potential returns of investment as well. So that's the context to pricing transparency. I'll share one slide after this, a more detailed description of the results of various polymers across each of those 4 markets, and also various policy interventions are available through the report. But I'll share one slide, again, just to set the scene for what prices look like in the context of PET material. So to illustrate this particular slide, we have reproduced data for 4 countries for PET, recycled PET input, which will help to understand the variance in pricing data across countries. Now, a couple of considerations as you look at pricing data. Obviously, pricing data is always sensitive information which comes through, and these are all offer prices. So these are prices which are reported back to us as we conducted the data collection exercise with various stakeholders. This was also collected in 2022, so please do not use this for benchmarking purposes and say that this is significantly different. Obviously, the market is dynamic, so the prices are expected to change quite rapidly. So as we reviewed the data, there were a few takeaways that we took from the various countries. In this case, again, this is specific to PET, but you can look at the same information for other polymers as well, some of which are more often traded than the others. So we learned that there's a misalignment between prices, which are expected by the collectors who are selling the plastic waste, the aggregators who are buying the plastic waste, and the recyclers buying the feedstock for recycling. In most cases, that misalignment is more significant in earlier stages of the supply chain, but it can still be prevalent at the latter stages as well. So in this case, you can see that the offer prices which are reported back for India is quite a sort of semi-aligned, very aligned in terms of what prices you have at the earlier stages to the latter stages. But if you look at Indonesia as an example, it's very clear that the range is quite significant in terms of what the offer prices expectations were. What we also learned is that the variation can even happen at the same supply chain, which is what I shared with Indonesia. Now, why this could happen? This could be various reasons. It could be in terms of the difference in the quality of products. It could be regional differences as well in markets like Indonesia, where it's such a geographically diverse archipelago, and you have Java, where most of the activity happens, in other markets or other cities where less activity happens. That could be a reason. Like I said, it could also just be the market dynamics where the price points vary significantly. It could also be that the ranges are influenced by a lack of transparency in pricing knowledge, where there's no market prices set. I mean, usually in the context of what we would think of as commodity-like prices, you'd expect some level of consistency in prices within one part of the value chain. And as you move up, there's some level of consistency in the next part of the value chain as well. So because those markets are not as well established, and we did see that in the case of PET, there's a slightly more well-designed and well-defined prices compared to other markets where the market is a bit more well-established for PET. We did see that the other polymers did not have that. So it could be that as well. Now, so with that context on the variation in prices and within a certain set of factors across the value chain, I'd like to invite my panelists, starting with Lubna. Julene, if you could help me stop the presentation, please, and we can spotlight on Lubna. Lubna, let me start with you. So by way of introduction, Lubna is based in Pune. She works with the waste picker cooperatives, Swatch, and the trade union KKPKP. Her work focuses on strengthening the livelihoods of waste pickers, and Lubna is a vocal advocate for a just transition for waste pickers. Welcome to the webinar, Lubna.
Thank you.
So to kick things off, I'm going to ask you a very basic question, but in the context of pricing. Because we have audience from different parts of the world, can you explain how the recycled plastic supply chain is structured in India, and how is the final price of recycled plastics determined?
Sure. So there are broadly 2 types of supply chains. So one is typically what is considered the recycling supply chain, which is waste pickers typically will pick waste either from landfills, from dump sites, or in some places where they have access through the formal solid waste management system. because we'll recover from the waste what is recyclable. So this is both plastic and non-plastic. They'll typically sell it to a scrap shop, very local. We're talking about a couple of kilometers radius there. The scrap shop will typically trade in multiple materials, so the entire range of materials. The scrap shop will aggregate from a bunch of these waste pickers and then sell to an aggregator who would typically be material specific. So you would have a rigid plastic aggregator, flexible plastic aggregator kind of thing. You may have several levels of these aggregators, and depending on the distance that the plastic travels. So the state that I am in has a fairly well developed recycling hub. And so you see plastic traveling maybe 200 to 300 kilometers to the bigger aggregators and then finally to the recyclers. But there are other parts of the country where it's traveling across state lines, really long distances, because the recycling hubs have sort of developed in certain parts of the country. In terms of formality, what you end up seeing is that the scrap dealers and the aggregators, and of course the waste pickers, are most often operating either semi-formally or completely informally, which means outside taxation, maybe not having registered entities, dealing completely in cash, those sorts of things. The apex recyclers are a little different. So the PET recycling industry in India is largely formalized and very, very high scale. The rest of the rigid plastic recycling industry is not so well saturated. So you do see a combination of formal and informal, but a fairly high presence of informal recyclers for the rigid plastics. For flexibles, you see the larger market share is very much informal sector, but you do, of course, have some large players. But in terms of overall market share of recycling, a lot of the flexibles is going to informal recyclers. Yeah.
Right. I mean, from the point of view of pricing, do you see any difference between those two value chains that you just described?
Yeah, so there's a parallel value chain that is gaining some traction now, which is through the solid waste management system. So the city has its own waste collection, or is supposed to have each city their own waste collection system. At the end of that system, there is some residual waste, typically MLP, flexible plastics, or contaminated plastics, which kind of pile up. Some of these are also channeled to recycler. So they would bypass the informal sector and they would kind of go from the material recovery plant of the city to recycling.
Right.
Prices are set from the top very much. I mean, the graph you showed in India also, it sort of makes a lot of sense. You see the gaps in the prices, which typically shows that as you go one rung up the chain, each next business is a little off. Your margins are a little bigger. You're earning a little more. You have more capital and able to kind of earn more from that system. The reason that most of the market is informal is that the demand for recycled plastic is only in as much as it is, say, 20 to 30% cheaper than virgin plastic. And that's not really changed. So the demand is strongly coming from this as an additive. So someone recycling or someone manufacturing is likely to add a small percentage, really to cut costs more than anything else, because it doesn't compete with virgin plastics on quality. So the whole recycling economy really only works if the end product is competing on price.
Right.
Which is why the prices are always suppressed and very, very, very widely based on the crude oil prices and the virgin plastic prices. So that's kind of how the market dynamics are developed.
Excellent. Thanks, Lubna, for setting that stage for India. And it's interesting to hear your perspective that prices not really decoupled when it comes to virgin recycled plastic prices, are not really decoupled from virgin plastic prices. That's helpful. Let me bring Tien now in from Vietnam. Tien is a waste management specialist at GRAC, which is a technology startup which provides digital solutions. So from Lubna, who's working directly in the value chain with waste workers, to Tien, whom you are a little bit removed, if I may say, and you have a nice higher level perspective. For the benefit of the audience, can you just give us an overview of the recycled plastic supply chain in Vietnam? Because then we can compare and contrast. And maybe we'll pull up the slides, Tien, you had, so that you can walk us through that explanation.
Yeah, thank
Please
you,
go ahead,
Mas. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I will show you an overview of recycled plastic supply chain in Vietnam. So in Vietnam, every year we release 3.9 million tons of plastics and 46 collections and disposal, but the remainder of the plastic is not handled properly and just 33 recycle. So there's many problem in the plastic supply chains in Vietnam. You can see at the diagram I show on the slide. That's mean from the waste generator, the generator include the household apartment buildings. So this is from here we release rubbish into the municipal waste operator is the main waste. However, the second weight is the informal collector. They collect their plastic and then they transfer to the junk shop, next to aggregator, and then to recycler. However, all these steps is not have a data tracking, so it's not clear in the price transparencies. Next slide, please. So, I will show you the reason why. That means this had the current state in recycled plastic supply chains. First, there's many reasons affect to the that's not unclear the transparency in Vietnam. Firstly, and this is the quality and the origin of the raw material. In Vietnam, yeah, people don't have the habit to sort the garbage, so everything is mixed together. The garbage and the food and many things are they don't have the classify. So this is the biggest issues that make the problems in the recycle change in Vietnam. The second thing is about the recycle technologies. We don't have many technology to have the people sort the garbage, and the waste treatment is also developed. The second thing is about the transportation and logistic cost. As you know, that seems all the garbage. If we classify the garbage, however, in Vietnam, the government just had one car or one truck. They collect all things and they put into their landfill. And so the transportation and logistic cost is the one of the biggest problem we need to solve. About the regulations and policies in Vietnam, we don't have many stringent law that's makes the about the we have clear the transparencies. So the price fluctuation according to market and demand, and the transparency is not clear. That means we depend on the informal sector. The formal sector is the connector between the generator and junk shop. So they have the metro in the recycle supply chain in Vietnam about the plastic. We talked to the role of the informal sector. That means they had the waste collections, classifications, and supply the raw material to the junk shop. And maybe they have great job, great income creations, and they have the great awareness, appearance, transparency, and ability to innovation and great. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Ian. I mean, I think comparing and contrasting India and Vietnam, similar markets in some respects, but I would think that when it comes to Vietnam, it's still developing when compared to India in terms of the relative maturity of the supply chain and also in terms of the awareness of pricing. Time for me to bring in Mani. Mani Vajpayee is the CEO, like Shweta mentioned, of Banyan Nation, a globally recognized plastics recycling company. So Mani, based on your experience, and based on our discussions with the various parties we interviewed during the study as well, recyclers seem to have the greatest awareness of market prices. Also the ability to set prices, though I'm sure that you would have a perspective on that as well. What are some of the ways in which recyclers can use this leverage to sort of improve pricing transparency along the whole value chain?
Thanks so much. I wish I was the all-knowing, all-wise, powerful recycler, but probably things are slightly different. But before I jump into my answers, I mean, thank you for all the thoughtful questions. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge the contribution of this report that you guys have put out. I mean, it does bring attention to pricing transparency or the need for pricing transparency in recycling supply chains. And I believe it's a crucial first step. I mean, the dialogue has to start somewhere. Now, just picking on some of the data points from the report, which I thought were very valuable, I think one of the assumptions, rather the conclusions drawn about the recyclers' market power is primarily based on their ability to capture about 70 to 80% of the supply chain profits. I wish that were true, but I mean, I think Page reports alludes to that. And this is a very important data point. Now, it's important to note that out of the 7,500 registered and unregistered recyclers, again mentioned in the report, less than 20 recyclers contributed to this report. I mean, that data is like a very important right set to first get a good context there. Now, we need to look a little bit deeper. One of the things that I saw is in the polypropylene market. I mean, because I'm a polyolefin recycler, the report talks about how the variations in the polypropylene pricing, $700 to $2,000, I think that's the price range given, speak about the market opacity. I mean, I have a slightly different point of view, Umesh, and I would like to
Sure.
share that.
Please.
There's a tremendous amount of local socio-economic dynamics that are playing into these recycling markets. That's point number one. Very quickly, through two, three examples. If you
Yeah.
take polypropylene, during the summer times, there's a tremendous demand for air cooler market, right? So a lot of these injection molding applications go there. Similarly, you take Pradhan Mantri Jal Jeevan Mission. Suddenly, you have a glut for the HDPE pipe market. Then all the HDPE materials flow there. Now, the quality variations, regional price differences create a tremendous amount of local complexity. I think that's one point to really understand very well. The second nuance I really want to highlight here, Umesh, is that there are inherent reporting biases, not from the report creators necessarily, but from the market. Uh, like Lubna mentioned, this is a predominantly informal market. Now, when you are operating in a shadow economy with an 18% GST burden and heavy compliance requirement, sellers tend to underreport sales prices and buyers tend to or might overreport purchase prices due to tax considerations. That creates a systemic and systematic price distortion in your data collection, right? Foundationally. Now, as one of the leading polyolefin recyclers in India, I think we have a dual advantage of actually being able to work with almost all the top brands in the country who hold us accountable for traceability and pricing transparency and so on and so forth. We also work with over 10,000 informal aggregators, so we are able to see one level up and one level down. But what we've learned reliably is different market players possess crucial market intelligence, very different information. Uh, Everybody is familiar with the layers in the Indian market. The collectors understand the local supply dynamics and quality variations really well, so that there is a price arbitrage there. The
Of course.
aggregators have the best regional price visibility and market networks. That's primarily because of the examples I've given. You need to understand and be plugged in into the local seasonality and the Pradhan Mantri Yojanas and all that. And the recyclers, the all-powerful, all-knowing recyclers like Banyan Nation, just joking, but they definitely have an edge, right? We understand the end market requirements and the virgin polymer prices. Now, my take, probably, Umesh, I do have a dystopian view here. This isn't about leveraging my position as a recycler to improve transparency. My take is we need policy frameworks that recognize and work with the informal distributed nature of the industry and not against it. Now,
Yeah.
foundationally, can we understand the nature of the markets? Can we recognize recycling industry as an essential service similar to agriculture in India where it's tax free?
Yeah.
Remove the very tax barriers that push the industry into the shadow economy, creating this lack of transparency. And again, like the fundamental misalignment, right, of the stakeholder interests that the current regulations sometimes create, right? So for me, the real opportunity lies in creating really an enabling environment where transparency emerges, let's say, naturally and organically. And we need to identify those traditional regulation that create this information asymmetry, if I may call it that way. I'll give you
Absolutely.
2, 3 examples, and obviously I'll leave it back to the panel, which is we've overcome such challenges in the past, Umesh. I mean, that's been my read in India. The milk cooperative model, which I can expound on later, the Dabbawala system, the Kirana store integration into the modern retail, the gig
Mhm.
economy of the plumbers, divers, right? I mean, the entire gig economy in the country.
Mm.
They work really well because they recognize and work with the informal nature of these services, right? Rather than trying to force fit them into traditional formal structures. So,
Yeah.
so rather than me leveraging my position as a recycler in working towards a price transparency, I call for a greater understanding of these markets and look at India's historical innovations in leveraging the informal networks to drive what I would call as price transparency. We've been very successful at that.
Thanks for that, Mani. I mean, not to say that you're all powerful and all knowing, but to say that your perspectives definitely matter. So let me bring in the perspective from Lubna, and she represents the Waste Worker Cooperative as well. Just to chime in on a similar question. Lubna, what is your view in relation to the pricing transparency in the recycled plastic supply chain? Mani commented on the need for policy and the critical enablers, and that's something I'd saved as a question for a subsequent discussion. But keen to hear your views as well.
Yeah. So definitely, like I said, the price right at the top is kind of stifled because of the natural competition with virgin plastic. There is definitely a major tax element. So I'm saying there should be like a 20 to 30% gap between your virgin plastics and your recycled plastics. Add on 18% to that, and you're killing the market, right? There's a reason that the market has remained informal. It's because there isn't space to formalize, because you formalize at the cost of completely losing the competitiveness of that business at all. So informality is not a choice. It's not being done by people in the market because there's so much cash, that they want to just keep it in the black. There is no space once you formalize.
Mm.
The other dynamic is that the way that, so there is then EPR regulation in India, and there has been now for a couple of years. But that has not done much to actually inject the recycling economy, either with more funds or even to increase demand. Like I'm saying, still the demand is coming from the same kinds of places. It's not that there is a renewed demand for recycled plastics that has pushed up the market price or something like that. If
Yeah.
anything, what it's done is a race to kind of count what is being recycled. And so you have formal recyclers replacing informal recyclers, but themselves, many of them struggling. So they'll get land from a municipality or something like that, some kind of way to subsidize their immediate non-viability. Because the fact of the matter is that if the market price is the way that it is, I mean, whether you're coming in with the intention to do it formally or informally, you're going to face the same issues.
Right.
And this seems to be fairly known within the sector, but I don't see enough happening by way of policy to correct for it. What EPR has done is really just add on anywhere between a few paise to a rupee and a half for really just the activity of counting. There is nothing within the EPR framework right now which actually allows for funds to trickle down through the chain. So it'll never reach the aggregator or the scrap shop or the waste picker. And even with the recyclers, from what I know, and I'm sure Mani can correct me, it's not covering cost of recycling to any substantial degree. What it is doing is covering that the cost of that extra work you've done to register on the portal and do that additional compliance. So it's
Right.
really covering a paperwork cost and not a meaningful, it does not meaningfully enough increase the price of recycling to allow formalization of the sector and actually bring up the tide.
Right. It's interesting, Lubna, you mentioned about EPR, because as a second part to this particular study, what we did do was to look at what is the impact of various policy interventions. And EPR, while we were all excited, and actually we covered 3 policies for each country. We were all excited to look at EPR, but the modeling results did say the same, what you've just mentioned, which is in the absence of people really knowing what the price flow looks like, EPR as a policy is not a particularly particularly good enabler of driving volumes, recycle output volumes. We did find that a few other policies did. Again, this is modeling results, so you have to take this with a pinch or a bucket full of salt. But it did have a little bit more of an impact when compared to EPR specifically. So let me bring Tien back into the conversation. And I think both Mani and Lubna did touch upon some of the challenges or the need of the hour when it comes to enable improved information and awareness of pricing transparency. So Tien, based on your experience in Vietnam, and I think this might cut across several of our markets as well, emerging markets in particular, what do you think are some of the barriers that exist today that prevent more transparency in pricing information availability for all the actors in the value chain? Again, I know, Tien, you have a slide, so may I request that we bring up the slide?
So to talk about the barriers, that means we had many challenges in the recycling supply chain in Vietnam. First, I want to talk about the complexity of the supply chains. That means the supply chains for recycled plastics in Vietnam in both the formal and informal factors, making it a high fragmented. So this is complex to limited the visibility across different stages, particularly in the pricings and trade volumes. The lack of the standard processes and formal agreements amongst the actor makes it challenging to track the prices from the collector to the final product. The second thing I want to talk and I mentioned this next before slide is about the reliance on the informal sector. A significant portion of plastics collections and initial processing is managed by the informal collectors and craft villages, which are often operate without business licenses and or formal agreement. This is informal reasons in the discrepancies in pricing information as the data from the informal actor is difficult to attain and verify. The second thing is unclear market dynamics. That's mean collectors, aggregators, recyclers often negotiations price very greatly and leading to the inconsistencies and variability in prices. This lack of transparency is exacerbated by the fact in each other in supply chains operating with the limited knowledge of the price downstream or upstream contribute to the market inefficiencies. The next thing I want to talk about the quality and material variability. That means the quantity of latex varies widely, which different affects prices. However, due to the informal nature of their early stage collections, there is a lack of their clear standard for assessing material quality. This reason to the full range of the price, even for similar material, adding to the opacity of the market. And the final reason I think is inconsistent data availability. Stakeholders are often reluctant to share detailed price data, either due to the competition or fear of disclosing commercial secrets. Thus, hesitations lead to gaps in the available data and making it difficult to any single actor or center party to have a complete view of the price structure. Yeah.
Thanks, Tien. And I think in the case of Vietnam, there's a lot of conversations also which come up around craft villages, right? Which is the informal sector and the significance of craft villages as well when it comes to recycling. Is that something that you can briefly touch upon?
Umesh, sorry, was it my turn?
No, Mani, just a quick follow-up to Tien. Tien?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, can you briefly touch upon craft villages as well in Vietnam and the role that they play?
So yeah, so I will talk to the chains. Okay. Yeah, maybe on those we have many challenge in Vietnam, so we also had a chance to have the recycle supply chains in Vietnam developed. That's mean we need to formulations the informal sector. This is the key actor in the plastic supply chain in Vietnam. And maybe we adoptions of technology. Yeah, we're using the digital platform to track and share the reality, prices, material, flow data, animal or others from the collector and recycler. And yeah, as we need to policies inventions. So EBR is one of the more important to have this one. Yeah, yeah. So this is my part.
Yeah. Thanks, Dan. I mean, I was talking slightly different, but thanks for the plug-in with respect to EPR as well, because Mani, it is indeed your time, and I have a question for you. You did touch upon the role of policy, and we did talk about recyclers in general. Um, while not pointing out a specific actor, or maybe you can as well, who do you think, or are there more than one actors who can play a critical role in some of the in overcoming some of the challenges which Tian already mentioned? Because I don't think that challenges which Tian mentioned for Vietnam are any different for India, and I would say that it's the same for Indonesia or any other emerging markets, more or less. So, who do you think is a key actor who can help us overcome these challenges to enable better understanding of pricing transparency, and what is the key role or function you think they should perform?
No, thank you. I think, see, Circulate Initiative, for example, is already playing a key role in connecting the dots, right? So, and I think you're right. And I think Theon also mentioned this is not a single actor initiative situation, right? Uh, the way I generally look at things, Umesh, is like I spoke about, not even policy per se. I want
Yeah.
to talk about massive inclusion challenges that were solved by India at a country scale. And then Aadhaar provided the digital identity to 1 billion people, right?
Yeah.
UPI democratized digital payments. That enabled even small vendors to participate in the digital economy. I'm
Absolutely.
sure some of your friends are working in the ONDC space, which is democratizing e-commerce, leveling the playing field for the small retailers. So, and the other institution that I feel can really catalyze the markets is anything like a microfinance institution, because formal credit for informal sector participants, I think they've done really well. There
Yeah.
are four common principles, Umesh, that I generally like to look at. Right, one is, are you building enabling ecosystems
Mhm.
vis-a-vis, or rather enforcing structures. Enforcing structures never work. Yeah, people find ways around it. You need to build enabling ecosystems. The second principle that I look at is, are we working with the existing market behaviors or against them? If you try and displace rather than integrate the informal sector players, and that's just not going to work. Are
Yeah.
you simplifying the compliance structures, or are you adding burden? Right, that's the third principle, guiding principle for me. And last but not the least, uh, Vietnam, Indonesia, I think you hit the nail on the head, right? See, most of the world, apart from North America and Europe and maybe Australia, right, and maybe Singapore, the formal and informal linkages have to be seamless and have to be very well thought out. I think these are the four common principles that I believe in, right? Now, once you have these common principles, the players become very easy, Umesh. One is government's role as an enabler. Take the
Mhm.
UPI platform, or remove the punitive taxation that pushes the industry into formality. That's what Lubna was talking about. And the supply chain participants. We spoke about the informal sector. We spoke about the brands. We didn't talk about the brands actually. Banyan Nation is a beneficiary of brands' dedication and commitment towards sustainability, Umesh. I mean, I think
Mm.
given their commitments to sustainability or use of recycled plastic on a long term basis, not based on the volatility of virgin polymer and crude oil prices, right, that creates a very stable market demand. Technology
Right.
providers, I think we went over the digital payments platforms, the microfinance institutions, the digital transactions without heavy compliance burdens, right?
Mm.
Industry and financial institutions, I think we spoke about it. So that's how I look at it, right? Can we create an ecosystem where the market forces and the technology and the policy, right, all align to enable a natural transparency? I mean, I yeah, I mean, and nobody asked me to use UPI. I don't use UPI because the government of India forced me to use it. It's about orchestrating this collaboration rather than enforcing control, right? I mean, that's really the way I looked at these markets and I built the solutions. I don't know if I'm making sense, but innovation, financial innovation, business innovation, policy innovation, market catalytic capital, I think these are all the things that I believe will really take recycling to the next level. Yeah.
Got it. Mani, I mean, digital integration and the examples that you've shared is really valid. If you and I think we have a similar question in the chat as well with respect to policies, right?
Yeah.
And we've seen and we've just discussed that EPR has not really successfully helped in terms of translating into increasing volumes of materials may not otherwise have been collected because of the lack of trickle down, as Lubna mentioned.
I'll take 30 seconds on this. So, Lubna, I do have a dissonant view here. I actually do think, particularly for recyclers like Banyan Nation, policy, which is the use of recycled plastic back in packaging again, particularly this particular policy. What the policy is saying is collect plastic, then you have to show somebody's recycling the plastic. But the third policy framework, which is you have to use the plastic back in
Recycle
packaging
content.
again, I felt it was a great driver, and it is catalyzing the markets. I mean, it's slightly dissonant view, but I'm seeing the tangible benefits of that in accelerating the markets. Yeah.
I mean, just to build on that, Money, I would see EPR per se as the producer polluter price principle and the responsibility. What you would be alluding to would be more like a minimum recycled content mandate. Is that correct?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Would you highlight? I mean, I think digital inclusion is key, and some of it has been we try all through the value chain. We're also trying digital integration, and you give the example of UPI. Maybe that would help.
Yeah.
Are there any other policies which you feel that can help improve pricing transparency? Would that information, again, this is a competitive market just like any other. It's obvious. But would that policy act as a catalyst to drive in investment or to make sure that there is better awareness of what the price flow is like across the whole value chain?
No, I think this is a good question. You're trying to bring everything together we've just discussed, right? I mean, all the points. See, I think I'm going to be at the cost of repeating myself. But rather than repeat myself, why don't I give like 3 or 4 immediate, medium term, and long term policy interventions that I feel can really, would that be good?
Yeah, that'd
Yeah.
be a great perspective.
Yeah. So I think, see, in the intermediate to short term, GST burden from recycling activities has to be removed, and think of agriculture, right? An agricultural producer. I mean, there's no taxation there. Similarly, you got to simplify the digital payment mechanisms for the informal sector, where they become the direct beneficiaries, right? Building on the UPI success. I mean, these are like you have to leverage the other infrastructure. The direct benefit have to be transferred to the waste collectors. There's no confusion about this.
Okay.
The other immediate term intervention from any of the multi-stakeholders that we've spoken about is even the indexes, Umesh, that you and I spoke about when we chatted offline. They talk about, first they talked about plastics, then they talk about resins. But there is a difference between the resin that Banyan Nation produces, which is like high quality food grade product contact, human contact, HDPE, to what's available in the market. So quality linked price discovery platforms. Again, an example is the agricultural mandis. In India, we have an agricultural mandi. Mandi is actually quality separated, right? That nuance is a very immediate term requirement, right? So that's my suggestion for specific initiatives.
Okay.
In the medium and long term, see, EPR, I think definitely works really well. I believe it's fantastic. Skill development, social security, tax benefits, recognizing informal sector as a industry of national importance. These are super critical. I think it's very important. ONDC, for some reason, which is not directly the digital payment, but the e-commerce enabler, I think can have a substantial impact. And last but not the least, I do believe that the microfinance, the credit markets, right? You take the milk farmers, how they lend to the small cows and buffalo, the farmers with 2-3 cows and buffaloes, the cooperatives, the milk cooperatives, the kirana store lending. See, that sort of credit to kabadis, bhandis, and raddis, And that sort of financial inclusion in the informal sector and insurance, by the way, Umesh, I want to highlight insurance. Plastics is extremely fire sensitive. It's very flammable. So insurance to the workers at the bottom of the pyramid, particularly in the informal sector, I think these in the medium to long term can drastically change these markets. I mean, this is my take.
Thanks, Mani, for that. Tien, let me bring you in then. Lubna, I'll wrap up the panel discussion segment with you. So, Tien, I mean, Mani talked about a mandi, which is essentially a marketplace, but with a little bit more transparency in Hindi. In the case of Vietnam, what policies, just like Mani and Lubna mentioned earlier, EPR or the success or the lack of it, minimum recycled content mandates as well. What policies do you think can help improve pricing transparency in Vietnam? And maybe that is something that we can take away for other markets as well.
Yeah. So as the money starts to EBR, I think that EBR is one of the important policies that have to the supply chains in Vietnam. That's because it's where the products can EBR is a policy approach where producers and how the responsibility for their lifestyle for their product. That's key if Vietnam implement the rule. But the EBR system can encourage the manufacturer to take the responsibility to their collections and recycling plastics. So the EBR should make the producer, and this is the cost, the waste management, and provide additional financial resources for the early stage. And I just want to, as one thing is about the public-provided partnerships. That's be the collaboration between the government and the NOGs and private industry can lead to the initiations, improve the price transparency and ensure that equitable compensation across the supply chains. And these partnerships can focus on the capacity building, technology adoption, and the price guidelines. Public-private partnerships can provide law firm shares their market informations, enhance the transparency, and ensure the fair compensation for smaller actors like collector, aggregator, or junk shop. Yeah.
Thanks, Tien, for that. Lubna, so Mani and Tien have shared their perspectives on what policies could support and improve pricing transparency. Now, from the point of view again of waste workers, and we talked about trickle down or the lack of trickle down, in fact, when it comes to a policy like EPR at this moment in time. How do we ensure that the marginalized section of that value chain are appropriately compensated for their work? Because it is critical to recognize that they're not just providing the service of collection of a material, but there's so much more that they're doing, including environmental service. How do we ensure that something like that is compensated for?
So two things. One is like Mani was saying, quality linked pricing. I definitely think there should be sourcing linked pricing because there is a very big difference between picking up free plastic and kind of marginalizing and displacing the informal sector in order to get all the city's plastic in one place and picking it up for free, where the cost that you're really cutting out is the payment to the waste collector, right? The payment to the waste picker is the cost that gets cut out in that system. And those are the cheaper systems and the more coveted sort of systems to run because economically the waste pickers are, I mean, it's super beneficial for the recycler to cut out the waste picker. That's the most expensive and decentralized part of the system. So sourcing linked pricing, incentivizing sourcing through the waste picker scrap shop supply chain, if that could actually be measured and traced, would be one way to do it. Another way to do it is, another kind of complementary aspect is that social welfare doesn't get covered for waste pickers that are not formally integrated within some system or the other. And there's a fair amount of, say, even if waste pickers are integrated, scrap shops are private businessmen, they have sorters and laborers working at their shops, and so do the aggregators and things like that. So to actually have a welfare coverage that goes to those registered waste pickers and waste workers, either like a center sponsored scheme or a center cum state sponsored scheme. In Pune, we've been able to get schemes that are actually covered by the ULB because finally the state is the big beneficiary, right, of the work of the recycling sector. It reduces the waste management burden essentially. So like an assess in addition. So for every credit of EPR, you have to pay this additional cess that contributes to, say, a national or state level tool for social security. The other thing that we've not touched upon yet, because we are actually talking about the part of recycling that is somewhat viable, is actually where is the market for the non-recyclable stuff or the tough to recyclable stuff. There are the flexible plastics, especially the colored flexibles and the PP kind of bags, and definitely the MLP kind of bags, which don't really have a market. Those are actually the materials that tend to bypass the informal sector the most, because they will end up as a rejection along the waste management chain and be picked up for free. So a better way to run a system like that is actually to create a market. What that is going to do is it's going to make the producer pay a fairly high price, right, for continuing to produce these kind of materials that were not designed by them for recyclability. But you do still need to source it through that supply chain. You still need to make it viable enough to, if it is viable enough to distribute, it needs to be viable enough to collect back, right? You are able to get it all the way up to the Himalayas where you have like hot tea and a cold mountain, but you need to be able to pay for the system to bring that packaging to a place where it can get recycled. And so ensuring that it flows through a market-based system means it has to cost a lot more, which naturally means you'll think twice or look at redesign of systems, look at redesign of production. So that's really where I think EPR has the potential to affect systems change, really. And the other thing, of course, is use of recycled content, but for reasons of quality, that becomes a problem, which is why those targets are also fairly low right now.
That's
You're
that's
muted,
been-
Vishnu.
yeah, just gonna unmute myself. I was saying that's really interesting, and I was as all of you were saying, and I was taking down some notes of what could potentially help. I did obviously write down policy and policy related initiatives. I did write down access to capital, not just for any one part of the value chain, but access to capital. And Mani mentioned the point of insurance as well. I did also write down digital access. I think that's a really critical part. And I think at least in the case of India, there's enough technology which can be leveraged and adapted for the use of the recycled plastic supply chain. Just on the Q&A, looking at the Q&As which have come through, Mani, there was a question for you, and can I just check? Have you answered that? You seem to have answered that, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me see. Are there any other questions? Shweta, do we have any other questions from the audience?
No, we don't. I think there are a couple of questions. We've typed in the answers. And so if you want to have one more question or one more final thoughts each, we have time for it.
I was going to ask, how feasible, I mean, I know we talked a lot about digital and integration, given the complexity of this recycled plastic supply chain. I know, Mani, you talked about dairy cooperatives and Dabbawalas as examples. And I'm quite familiar with the dairy cooperative because my education goes back to something which is very close to that, and my employment as well to some degree in the initial days. But how feasible is that, or how realistic is that when you look at it from the point of view of a recycled plastic supply chain? Because farming, while comparable, it's not exactly comparable because of the nature of the value chain, the nature of the product which is produced, the utilization of the product. Can this really be applied, and can digital be one of the pathways which could sort of bring about better insights into pricing flow information? And that's a question I'll raise to all of you, because we talked about policy. We did not touch upon digital access and digital inclusion. Would that help? And that's a closing question I'll ask all three of you. So maybe Lubna, for you, from the point of view of waste workers, how feasible is it? How accessible is it? Mani, from your point of view, and Tien, for you, from your point of view for Vietnam. Maybe I'll start with Mani, and then I'll go to Lubna, and then Tien.
I think it's eminently possible. And see, when you started in 70s in the White Revolution era, or even earlier when Mr. Verghese Kurian came back to India, the general idea is we try and plonk Western solutions to the Indian context. I think we need to trust ourselves on the Anganwadi models, on the cooperative women models. So what do 5 women have as collateral to offer or product to offer? It's trust. One of the women defaults and the remaining 4 put her back in line, right? So you need to understand that not everything is quantifiable through your collateral, right? I mean, you're saying your buffalo is your collateral in the case of a milk cooperative, your kirana inventory or his kiosk is the collateral in the case of kirana. But what do you have to show for in a recycler network? Maybe you have a Banyan Nation's commitment to buy 50 tons per material per month to that I'm committing to buy, just as a Unilever is committing to buy from me. I'm going to commit to that, right? So see, you only have to look back on the pages of Banyan India's history to see that there have been tremendous innovations at the bottom of the pyramid that don't essentially make sense through a Western framework lens, right? And I think we have to be brave and open-minded about it, and I think the time has come. So I have no doubt whatsoever that our financial markets are today very sophisticated to offer not only access to capital for capex and working capital, but they're going to make very innovative products like insurance. And I think the next 5 to 10 years, this is probably the sunrise sector. I mean, that's the way I look at this.
Thanks, Mani. I look forward to hearing more about forward-looking contracts for recycled plastics material in the near future. Lubna, there are 2 questions for you, one in the chat and then one specifically on digital inclusion. Let's talk specifically about the audience question. I'd like to prioritize that. There's a question around the way forward for the sustainability of organizations such as yourself and Safai Karmacharis. What's your perspective on that? This is different from pricing transparency, but it's an important question worth answering.
Yeah. So first and foremost, the core demand of waste, because in India and across the world, from the International Alliance and national alliances and individual waste picker organizations, is that access to waste is where the big insecurity comes from. There is a lot more, like the world around waste is changing quite a bit, and it has been over the last 20 years as waste management systems have evolved, and now as recycling is getting more of a focus. And so it means that their access to waste is now very insecure. Unfortunately, all of these years they were handling waste when nobody cared about it, and now that people care about it, it's being kind of taken out of their hands in many places. And so the absolute first and foremost demand, you'll see that in our EPR position papers as well, is integration within solid waste management. What happens now is there is a solid waste management system which is trying to look at viability of different aspects, because solid waste management, it's a public service and it costs money and it is not a revenue generating model. I mean, it's not an income generating model. What you can generate at most is some revenue, which means that it's competing with the informal recycling sector that has been working with the revenue generating fraction of a city's waste. And the informal sector is looked at as a leakage by most government officials, by most waste management agencies that are managing solid waste, because a part of their expectation is that they should be able to offset some costs using the recyclables. And so now everyone is kind of building systems around that same waste that before such systems were in place was being handled by waste pickers without additional infrastructure, without additional support, and without additional incentives for, say, better recycling or incentivizing recycling, things like that. So the logical, long-term, sustainable way out of this is to actually look at merging the two, to look at the scrap shops, the waste pickers being a part of the city's municipal waste management system. And this can be done in a variety of ways, and different models are already in operation in different parts of India, and not small cities. In big cities like Pune and Bangalore, you have a scrap shop-esque model in Bangalore, you have a waste collector in Pune. And so there's many options for kind of marrying those two systems. So you optimize the work of the waste picker, the labor of the waste picker, but within the solid waste management system. And that's kind of, I think, the deck is stacked then for long-term sustainability.
That's very interesting. I mean, looking forward to learning more about some of these models as well. That's great, Lubna. Thanks for sharing about it. Tien, final word to you in terms of what do you think, or what measures, or what can help improve overall pricing transparency? You touched upon EPR and policy initiatives. So, just to wrap up, is there anything else which you think would improve the knowledge of pricing among the various actors in the recycled plastic value chain?
Yeah, I just want to, as you mentioned, two things that they have the transparencies. Firstly, we need to standardizations of the material quality. That means
Right.
we introduce the clear standard of the quality of recycled material, would reduce the variability in the price due to the inconstant material specification. And this would be benefit for all the actors by establishing clear benchmark for the pricings based on the material quality. And the
Right.
second thing is, I think is adoption of technology. That means we just using the digital platform, and we can track and share the real-time price and material follow data that could enable for all actors from the collectors, aggregators, and recycler. So we can access to transparent market informations. This would be how to reduce the informations and empower smaller actors to negotiate better prices. Yeah.
Thanks, Tian. Looking forward. So, like I told Mani and Lubna, looking forward to an open access platform where that information can be available to all actors equally. I'm afraid we've come to the end of the hour, and we need to wrap up this presentation. I'm sure we could have gone about this for another hour, Shweta, and not done justice to this topic still. But this has truly been a fascinating discussion for me. Thank you so much to Mani, Lubna, and Tien for your inputs. Thanks also to the audience for the questions, and Shweta, yourself, and Julie for the great collaboration and support. Wonderful stuff. Thank you, and have a great rest of the day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah,
everyone.
thank you.
The webinar is going to be up on the Be Wastewise website in a couple of weeks, but you will all have access to it because you've already registered for it. So in case you need to forward it to someone, in 2 weeks, you can come back and check our website. Thanks a lot. Have a
Thank you
good
so
day.
much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.